This year the girls gathered flowers for their hair, and the singing and celebrating went on half the night. Our Beltane meal might have been taken from pigs we should have kept for winter time, and our broiled greens picked too young from the woods, but our bonfires were huge. My mother says the custom of the fires comes from somewhere backward in the fog of time, long before the Normans, long before even the priests and the abbeys and their saints. Beltane fires are made big and smoky. Then we herd the cattle close to the fires to let the smoke wash over them, and the firelight dapple their sides. This protects them against disease and accident, or so said my grandmothers, both of them. People prayed aloud only to the saints, especially when there were priests near enough to hear. I am sure that many silently asked the old gods and the fairies for help as well. I did, and we still ran the cattle between the fires. The day after the feast, with the men still tired and some with headaches from the holiday honey mead, we prepared to leave for the high pastures with the cattle. I was still scared, but I was excited, with Bevan back, to be going up to the high pasture with the cattle. If the gray mare had not been stolen, I would have begged my father to let me take her with us. As it was, I only begged him to keep an eye out for her. "I will," he said, looking over my head and shouting out an order before he looked at me again. "I will." I thanked him. "I have watched you working," he said suddenly, focusing on me. "You aren't lazy." Praise from my mother made me blush. Praise from my father stunned me senseless. "Thank you," I stammered. "Be sure you all take turns keeping watch at night," he said. I nodded. "I will send a few men in a fortnight to bring back whatever cheese and butter you've made." He looked hard at me, then at the sky. I thought he was going to speak again, but he just let out a long breath and walked away. "We're depending on you," my mother said after he had gone. Then she kissed my forehead. We had a fair amount to carry. I had already sorted out my load, but I did it again because I was too jittery to stand doing nothing. Each of us had a linen sack filled with whatever we couldn't leave behind. I was bringing an extra lean, the one that was a little too small now, an old yellow brat of my mother's, and a blanket. We all carried a little food, a tiny portion of whatever our families had left, as well as a separate sack that held what we would need to make cheese. I carried my share of the sheep's-gut rennet and packets of salt and herbs to flavor the cheese. To eat we would rely on scant milk, greens from the woods, and whatever we could find until calving began and the cows came back into milk. Then we would start making cheese. The salt and rennet we're carrying would be used up, but visitors from home would bring more and then take our new-made cheese and butter back to the tooth. While we worked at the dairy, our families would labor in the fields. If the wheat and corn grew well, if the peas and vegetables were kept free of beetles and bugs, soon none of us would be going to bed hungry. It made my mouth water to think of pea porridge. The Beltane feast had been the first and only generous meal any of us had in months. I hefted my sacks, then tied the open ends together to sling them over my shoulder. I was grateful that the cauldrons and pots we would need were already there. I find myself watching my mother as she talks to Bevan's mother. They had both taken the cows to high pasture many times as girls. Bevan and Garrett kept looking at their mothers, too. I suppose I wasn't the only one who was a little scared as we stood waiting for the herd. I nodded. That had scared me, too. It still did. If my father raided them, they would probably try to raid us again. "How did you get away?" Garrick asked. Bevan smiled. That part was simple. When they finally stopped to camp, I lay there listening to them talk, pretending to sleep. Once all of them were snoring, I crept away. "I wanted to bring your gray mare home to you, Laura," she said softly, "but I was afraid the horses would neigh if I let her off. I ran all night and hid when it got light. I doubt they even looked for me. They seemed in a hurry to get home." I reached out to touch Bevan's cheek. "Thank you for even thinking of the mare when you were so scared." She shrugged. "They were like the men of our own tooth. They gave me cheese from their provisions and water, and I don't think they had any more food than we did." She fell silent then. When she did speak again, her voice was soft and thoughtful. "I heard them talking. None of the men wanted a feud with your father, Laura. They were angry at the man for taking me captive. They had only meant to steal horses to get even for a raid before in bulk." I clenched my fist hearing that. "There was more to it than that," I said. "My father would not steal from someone who had done him no wrong." "Maybe the wrong was 10 years ago, though," Garrick said. I knew it was impossible, and I pressed my lips together. They recognized the gray mare, Bevan said quietly. They said she belongs to some powerful Ree, someone they're afraid of. My father found her wandering and wounded, I whispered, wondering now if he had lied, if he had been a part of the battle that had wounded her. Am I only saying what I overheard? Bevan said quietly. She paused for a long moment, so long that I thought she was through talking about it. When she did speak, her whisper was barely audible. The man who captured me said his wife was going blind from clouded eye and that she needed help in the kitchen, Bevan said. They have no daughter, and she is scared alone. That's why he wanted me, to help his blind wife. Garak made a little sound of sympathy. Her grandmother had been blind the last 10 years of her life. I inhaled slowly, unsure what I was feeling. Do you understand now? Bevan said. This is why I haven't talked about it. I hated him for taking me, but I pitied his wife. I was sorry for them all. They lost 3 old people in the cold of Gam for lack of food, because someone robbed them of most of their horses, and they couldn't trade for wheat and rye. She hesitated, then whispered, I don't want to hate them. No one said anything as we each sorted through our thoughts. Had my father been the one who raided their tooth? It was possible. He told stories about how he fought, not about why. He will try to find them now, regardless of what went on before. I said quietly. Even though you're home and safe, he will want to make it even for our mares. Even, Bevan echoed. I nodded, knowing her thoughts without her saying them. When would they ever be even? As we lay in silence, drifting towards sleep, I thought about the gray mare. Wherever the truth about my father lay, the mare had done nothing to deserve being galloped to breakneck across rough country with her foal so close to coming. I listened to Bevan and Garak breathing deep in as they fell asleep. I dreamed of the mare and her foal. We were both back home, and my father gave the foal to me. In my dream, I cried for joy. I woke to Fallen nudging at me with her foot. Get up, she said. Build a fire. It was still dark. I heard a long, quavery howl and sat up, touching Bevan's shoulder. Woofs, I told her. She woke Garak. The cattle were shifting uneasy, and we heard more howling, first to the north, then to the east, as the wolf circled our hill. We were up the rest of the night, keeping the fire's bright orange gold sparks rising in the sky.